Have you ever had a circumstance where you've been more feminist than your partner?
No.
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
and welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
That's a slogan we should put on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Andy, how you doing?
Not too bad. I have another car park incident for you to dissect.
Another car park one. All right.
Yeah, technically not a car park. It was on a street, actually. So let me paint a picture of the situation. So there's a one-way, street. It actually just goes outside the office building where I work.
Yeah.
So it's a one-way road, but there's like a little 10-minute parking nook or something, on the left. And so you can drive in one way and park in this to the left of the road. Like, it's just for parking. It's not a separate part of the road or anything. It's just a special segment. And so what happened is a car, you know how when you want to reverse park into a certain location. So the first car stops, in the location where you would, be positioned to reverse park into it. And then the car behind it goes into the space.
No.
And so I presume there was indicators I didn't see, but I presume that it was clear there was an indicator, and this person's just gone in. I have no sense of intent or whether they didn't realize or anyway, but this is where it gets interesting. The car who originally, the first car that wanted to reverse park into it, isn't happy.
Yeah.
And doesn't let it go.
I bet.
But this is a one-way road, and there's cars banking up behind that car. And that car wants to have an argument about that they should be in it's their spot
For the next 10 minutes.
But get this. How does the car that's taken the spot get out of the car park? Because there's cars backed up and there's no way for them to reverse out of it, even if they realize they've done the wrong thing. There is literally no other solution. Even if that person who the second car that went in is really apologetic and, I stuffed up, sorry, absolutely sure. I don't know if that's their attitude, but let's say even if you take the most generous view that was their approach, they can't give it up. There's no way. They can't do the right thing. And that first car is irate. And so you have this situation where there's just no room to move. And so on one level, that first car is in the right, that yes, that was a dick move, right, to take their spot. But there's no way to go. There's no way out of this situation. So I'm interested in your views on this. Oh, and by the way, there is a bank of traffic honking their horns and all that sort of stuff, right, as well.
Thank you for that context. It was carefully laid out, but you missed the most important detail. What was the race of each of the drivers?
I think they were both Indian, actually. Both. So that kind of, took race out of it. But yeah, I think they were both Indian.
It's that kind of white on white crime. I love it. Look, this is like a Seinfeld episode of whether it's socially acceptable to pull in, front in to a parallel park versus a reverse, go past it and then reverse back into it, right? And it all depends on how much room there is to do that. But that's not what you're talking about. I guess, look, to me, it's kind of what was the tone of it, right? Because if the person that took the spot, that probably should have, conceded that someone was there first and waiting for it in a car, I might add, as an important ingredient from last week, were they apologetic? Did they acknowledge that they had undercut or queue jumped this particular situation? Because I can imagine a scenario where if you've taken it, even if you've taken it opportunistically, right? Because you thought there was a bit of chaos, and you could claim that the car in front was obstructed by the car that was leaving the park, and you took it. You still would have to. You still could get out of that situation by applying enough empathy and being very apologetic to that other car, and probably still get away with it. That might be enough. Like, I think in these situations, the way I see it is that there's two egos at play, right? Something has not. There's been a bit of injustice in the world, depending on the context, and they both need to have enough of a, save enough face to walk away from this with some kind of satisfaction, right? Whether that's in terms of apology or whatever it is, there needs to be a little bit of something so that they can both leave with their heads held high. And in many ways, that's the best. Like, people are looking for a way out most of the time. So if you can give that to them, like, I think that would have been the best thing to do, whether he meant to take it or not. So I don't know. Could you tell, were they apologizing or were they getting into it?
Okay, so I didn't really hear any words, like the actual words spoken, right? So I had a sense of like that there was some sort of conversation going on. But it's interesting you brought up like race before. I know you only brought it up jokingly, but there was a little bit of a dynamic because, as I said, they're both sort of, I think, I might be wrong, but I think they were of subcontinental heritage on both sides. But that, as we know in like, let's say Indian culture or, in this part of the world, there's still a very strong social hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
And the first car that went to go and reverse park into that spot was, I can't remember the brand, but it was like one of those like $100,000 SUVs, like kind of very expensive sort of.
Oh, my sex UV.
Like whether I think it was like a BMW or something like that.
Yeah.
And the dynamic also was that like it was a couple, so I presume husband and wife, and they had like I think probably a young teenage son in the back seat.
Mm.
So the dynamic was, he is like this very upstanding Indian family, and actually it was the wife, or what I presume to be the wife, that was doing all of the talking. So because it was on the left, right? So it was her. She was the passenger, right?
She had shotgun.
So she had her window down, and she was conversing with the other guy, and the other guy was like beat up, like cheapest secondhand car that you could buy. He looked like a courier or something, like some kind of like tradie or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But basically the complete opposite of the $100,000 SUV sort of thing. And so that was like ever present in the situation. Like that was just an obvious kind of thing to look at. Anyway,
yeah,
there was definitely some exchange, but like I remember looking, I actually just stopped because I want to watch this. Like this is so exciting. And because I could see like how, like the problem, like it was like one of those puzzles where you've got to move like the tiles on the puzzle board, and you can only like move one because the space is like, and I was thinking, oh, this is like going to explode because this car's obviously thinks they're in the right and they're not going to back down, or they don't want to back down. But like, where's this guy going to go? There's like a car up his ass. He's got nowhere to back into. Yeah. And then there's another like 5 or 6 cars behind that car. So yeah,
it's tough with the flow of traffic in a car park to begin with, right? Because you can, that situation that you've outlined here happens even when people go past an available car spot, right? Like I'm sure we've all had that experience of, we're all in a queue, and depending on your luck, someone might pull out, right? When you're leaving the shops or whatever, and then, oh, bingo, my time to park. But there's always someone who thinks that, they've already passed the spot, but they try to back up to reserve it, right? And I think that's being very cheeky as well, right? So, because once you pass it, bad luck. You got to keep going, because if you try to back, what are you going to expect the car behind you to reverse as well? And then this,
we have to have your indicator on. It has to be
people do.
I know they're leaving.
People do it, right?
I've got my indicator on.
Like I've seen that many times, right? Because I think that is a grey area for some people, right? Although I don't think so, but and I think that's just, it goes back to this thing around like, I think how they sell it to themselves is about being assertive, being an assertive driver. I would say that it's usually men doing that kind of thing to try to muscle in on a spot. But look, I think at the end of the day, right, like this is also where power dynamics come into it, right? And I feel like some of the worst behavior is the dynamic that the combination of people that you've outlined, because you've got a husband and wife, right? And they're kind of protected in their family unit, and the wife even more so in modern polite society in Australia. So I often find that when these things really kick off, it's with women involved, antagonizing it because they are safe behind the social norm of not getting punched in the face. Whilst if there were two men there would be this ever-present danger of this physical confrontation. And that kind of, it's like the sword in the sheath. It kind of keeps people in check, because if you really care about this enough, you've got to be ready to ready to rumble, because that's how it could go. If there's no women involved, no children involved, the chances of it devolving into a bit of a fisticuff is much higher, right? And in some ways, that can help, right? And like this is actually getting into a deeper thing of like power dynamics, and actually the threat of force in some way really changes that calculus on the risk that you're willing to take. But women don't feel that, right? Because it's socially unacceptable to.
Isn't that partially the whole Karen kind of phenomena, right?
Absolutely, right? Like I think that, and that's why I say when I've seen like really heinous, I mean, I haven't seen that many, but in real life, when I've seen confrontation, either in this kind of garage parking situation or actual street fights, like, when you're out in the town or whatever, the worst ones are always when the woman is antagonizing the fight, right? They're kind of usually like all parties are drunk, and then there's the partner of the person in the altercation kind of just yelling at the other guy or whatever, and then it kicks off, right? Because she feels somewhat safe confronting them.
Let me talk through what actually happened in the end. But before I do that, I just want to riff on what I think should have happened, which is, and I don't exactly know what was said or whatever, but based on how it ended, I have a sense that the guy who actually was, took the spot, did sort of acknowledge that he did the wrong thing, or at least made a mistake. But what I think should have happened in this situation is that first car, the big $100,000 SUV, should have been the bigger man, right? They should have been it's okay, this stuff happens, it's all right, we'll move on, and there's cars behind us, we'll cop it on the chin. That's probably what should have been the outcome. But what the outcome was is that first car was adamant that no, this is our spot. I didn't hear anything we'll wait here all day until you move, kind of anything like that. So I'm not sure if there was threats or whatever kind of the nature of the conversation was, but it was definitely a negotiation that guy's got to move out, right? Because we're going in our spot that we should be in, right? And I think the issue is that once the cars started building up behind, that then became well, yeah, but let's be pragmatic now. It's not about the Asian woman reserving the car space with all the cars. She just has to go. This is she can't go now, with the equivalent, right? This guy can't go.
Yeah.
So the way it ended is the guy had to communicate to all the cars behind him that they had to reverse to create enough space for him to back out so this car could go in. And I'm just thinking this guy, he is absolutely notwithstanding the original sin of it, right? This guy's 5 stars to him, because he's going and negotiating with the cars behind him that they've got to move back so that he can move back. So this motherfucker in the $100,000 SUV can get the spot.
Can I ask one follow-up question? Was the SUV a BMW?
I think it was, yeah. I think it was either a BMW. Yeah, I don't think it was a Lexus or a Merc or,
all right,
a Touareg or something like that. It was
that changes things for me. There is something very special in the echelon of obnoxious drivers that goes to BMWs, right? Every time you see someone who blatantly refuses to use their indicator, it's a BMW. And special points is it if it's an M3 or an M1 kind of SUV or whatever. But literally,
I think it was an M5 or
you always see they're the ones that always just why even put indicators in BMWs because no one ever uses it, right? So I do think there's something there in that culture. But look, I think that the other thing to call out here too is that in a lot of Asian countries, and I'll just pick on Malaysia because that's something that I have experience with, there is a double parking culture, right? Like I have lots of memories of being double parked in and seeing it happen right in front of my eyes. And then when you come back, from your shopping or whatever it is, you can't leave. And literally it's not uncommon to hear people just leaning on their horn to try to like call the person back, therefore like doubling down on the inconvenience that's caused everyone because now there's this horn just like constantly going, hoping that someone out there will hear this horn and come and move their car. And then when they come and move their car, there's no apology. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, I've moved your car, but then what more do you want? Now you can get out. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, right? Like, I was thinking, was I too hard on the situation? And I'm like, no, I wasn't. Like, I talked to actually some of my, I talked to my mum about it, right, and some others in the Asian community, and they hate it too, right, because it's a poor reflection on the group, and they agree. Like they know it's bad behavior. They're just doing it because they're used to it. And I understand what you were trying to say about it being that there are cultural aspects that make it easier for that kind of behavior to flourish. But seriously, like that's not what you want. And these people are adults; they can learn it very, very easily. I think that this idea of like, I think the golden rule, this idea where the golden rule is, I think, something to the tune of do unto others what you would want done to yourself, right? To me, it's like, I think there is a better one. And it goes something like this. It says, the best thing you can learn as an individual is to respect the value of someone's time. Because I think that if you apply that principle, 99% of this shit behavior, this chav behavior, goes away. Because you think to yourself, am I valuing other people's time? Right? Whether they're being stuck in a queue, whether they've been waiting and they're trying to get something done, is such a good rule, right? Like, and I think that people who are habitually late or do all this stuff, like, no one's perfect. No one's perfect. And some lives are more frantic than others, disorganized than others, but still.
What time are we supposed to start tonight, Roger?
I know, that's why I said that. But I was communicating. Joking. I was giving you updates.
I was later.
Yeah, and after all that, you were the one. I was still waiting. The other really annoying thing, just to kind of throw us into kind of like a dangerous territory. Isn't it funny how, like, if there's this dynamic as old as time when it comes to men and women and like husband and wives or whatever it is, partners, where you're trying to get ready to get out of the house for something. Yeah. And there's always this push and pull because women inherently have more on their dance card to get ready to go out, right? Because they've got, they got the makeup, they got the hair, they got the outfit and all this kind of stuff, right? And they care obviously a little bit more than men do. Men have like, less outfits, less choices, less probably care that goes into it, let's be honest. So there's this dynamic where it's taking the kids out of it. It's much easier for men to get ready and get out of the door than women. And as a result, men are always like anxiously trying to manage the time so that you're not late to a venue or late to leave. But then this crazy thing happens where it's like this bait and switch. And I don't know whether you've experienced this before, but you'll be chasing, right? You'll be chasing. Are you ready? Like time check. We're going to be late. Don't change outfits, whatever it is. And then right at the last minute, she'll like beat you to the door and she'll be like, look, I'm waiting for you. I've got my shoes on and you haven't got your shoes on now. Now I'm waiting for you. I've been there for ages. I've been sitting there waiting to get in the car. And you're like, yeah, you got to be kidding me. Have you ever experienced that?
All the time. It's interesting you bring in like a gender side to this because like I've always wondered how much of this stuff is cultural as well, because as opposed to like necessarily gendered, because I do think Western society has this, and it is probably they've adopted the rule that you just called out, I think generally is taken to heart. Like it is like, no, you have a meeting at 1:00. You don't arrive at 1:00. You arrive at 5 to 1, just in case your schedule gets stuffed up and you're late, or if you're, visiting another office, like you have to get a taxi or something. We'll aim to be there 15 minutes before, like because it would be absolutely crazy if you were late for the meeting, kind of thing. And then like in other settings, like even social settings, it's like there's a 7:00 booking for dinner. It's a reservation. You get there at 7 on the dot. Like there's no like 7:05 or 7:10. It's like
the type
you
too,
get
right?
there with plenty of
like
time.
like even in friendship circles, the type that are like you have a party or you have a dinner and you're like, oh god, they could turn up whenever, right? Like they could turn up an hour late or whatever it is, right? And obviously that becomes less and less acceptable as you grow older and you mature. But look, people know it's right to be punctual, because even the laziest son of a bitch, and they call it Malaysian time sometimes because they're habitually so late in Southeast Asia, right? And so relaxed about this. But even those people who turn up to parties late or abuse dinner start times or whatever, they would never dream of turning up to a job interview late. Do you know what I mean? Because they know that would affect their chances of getting the job. They know that it's wrong, to my point, but they do it in other settings where they can get away with it.
The culture is you be on time for meetings. So the signal you're giving to your future potential employer, if you're even if it can even be if you're not 5 minutes early for the interview, right? Like late is actually you arrive 1 minute before the interview start date. Like that can be late in the minds of the employer, right? Oh, this guy cut it a bit fine. But the signal is that this is someone who is not compliant. This is someone who is just a little bit out there, right? But like let's say in the social setting, I think there's a little bit more wriggle room, because what does it matter? Like if you've said, "Oh, come at 1:00 to our house for a barbecue or something," right? And 1:00 does mean anywhere between 1 and 2:00, probably. Like, or probably not early, but like it doesn't necessarily mean 1:00 sharp.
You got to
right?
feel that out with whatever the group dynamic is. You got to feel that out, because I can.
Well, it depends on the setting, right? But I guess
that lobster bisque is getting cold, right? Like,
I guess I just think there are other cultures where what we've just talked about, it doesn't apply, right? So it like you said Malaysian time, but like there's Fiji time, right? That's
and it's, I mean,
concept.
Have you ever been in Italy and asked for the bill? Oh my god, you got to ask for the bill like 4 times. While in Western countries, they give you the bill because they want you to leave, right? So this is different mentality, and there's different reasons why they do things, right? But I think at the end of the day, it's a respect for people's time, the value of it. And one of the worst takes I've seen on this online, again, is cutting this through a colonial, like, settler mindset, where they're like, oh, it's actually quite racist to assume that people have the same value of judgment. And actually being punctuality as a concept is like a British colonial thing. This idea that, you run it to some kind of ledger, and it's actually racist because other cultures don't have the same idea of time, and you're punishing people for punctuality, and really it's nothing to do with their value. And I was just like, oh man, that's a terrible take. That really is.
I wouldn't go so far as to say it's racist, but I think the point that they're probably trying to make in response is that like it's easy for us to insert our biases in terms of like, because we've got certain cultural values, that we give a higher weighting to that as an important factor, even if, let's say, it's not relevant to the work of the job. So it might be less relevant. So, I mean, like another example would be the whole early riser, late, like people who go to bed early and wake up early, and those who go to bed late and wake up late. Like we do have, I think, in Australia, and it is like a Western, I don't know, it's definitely not a Western thing per se, but it's definitely like a British sort of thing, I think, where it's like people get up early and start their day early, and they go to bed early, so such that if that's not how you live your life, either for like biologically you're not geared that way, or even just doesn't work for you, like work home life sort of situation and commitments and so on, that if you're the last one in the office, even if you're the last one to leave, you will be perceived as someone who doesn't work as hard as the first person to arrive in the office, even if that person's the first to leave.
Because no one can tell that you're the last person there. All the people
Well, no
already
one can
left.
tell you're the first person there either. It's no different. Like, it's completely symmetric, right? But the fact that you're the first person, there will be a bias that, that you must be a harder worker, right? Even though that's completely bullshit, right? And it may be true for those who are like the last to arrive and the first to leave, and that can be a thing too. But then there's no reason to sort of like project that early risers are more proactive, right? That's in fact, a lot of people.
You know my stance on that. I think I've already had a go with the early corporate riser, and their 3 bowls of all bran.
I mean, we're recording this at like right now it's 10 p.m. at night, right? So we're actually arguably quite productive at this phase of the night when people would be like falling asleep because they've gotten up at 6 a.m. to go for a jog or something.
Yeah, they're cold plungers waiting for them. I totally agree with what you're saying in some ways, but I do think that it's a bit of a reflecting on last week's conversation. I do want to double down on my judgment of the situation, because I just think that you cannot convince me that having that empathy for the value of people's time is a nuanced thing. I can appreciate the mechanisms that led us there and whatever it is, but I'm going to stand by that, because I think that creates a better society when people are more empathetic and can kind of respect people more. I think that's vital.
I mean, look, these kinds of traditions, like in a culture, are what make society function and work, right? And they often say that like economies that have, let's say, strong enforcement of like property rights are more efficient and more proactive, because you can make investment decisions if you know that you have rights over the benefits of the investments you make. And it's a similar thing here with culture in that if we all have a shared understanding of how things are going to work, and it allows us to like function more efficiently with our dinner parties and all that sort of stuff, then it's a benefit.
It's a trust thing, right? Like that's why they call it consumer confidence, right? And I think you need that to function, and I'll stand by that. And it can be accused of being a self-hating Asian, but it's and look, my parents have never been like that. They've always been punctual, and I think obviously that, again, you can say that that's a socialization thing. I haven't built that value off my own back, but I can kind of like analyze it and see its use. You don't need to be victim to your socialization perpetually through your whole life, right?
Are you ready for a listener question?
Yeah, give it to me.
Okay. Hi, Andy and Roger. I'm a long-time listener and a feminist who appreciates your frank and often controversial opinions. In a recent episode, you discussed the importance of challenging ideas and the concept of conversations being like a game of tennis. As a woman in a predominantly male-dominated field, I find myself frequently engaging in debates where I need to assert my perspective. However, I also believe in understanding and empathizing with opposing views, especially when they come from men who may not share my experiences. How do you suggest navigating these discussions without compromising my feminist ideals, but still being open to controversial opinions? Thanks for keeping the conversation going.
All I can say is, before we dive into the question, that tennis analogy that you brought up in that episode has had some mileage, hey? Like, I think that's something that's really stuck with people. We've had 3 or 4 questions from the listeners that have used that. So there you go. I didn't know there was that many tennis lovers out there. I don't know. Do you want to have a first crack at this one? I kind of feel like when I think about the 2 episodes that we have dedicated to gender and feminism, I have probably come out of that situation a little bit worse based on some other feedback, and I'm sure we'll get to those particular listener questions as well. And I'd love to stand up for myself there, but maybe I'll let you have a crack first.
Well, look, to our listener, I think the best thing you can do is to work on your resting bitch face. No, look, I think, maybe to flip this 180 degrees. So like this question is about how can you talk to men about views, particularly when they kind of are about like let's say a feminist-esque topic, like, something to do with, gender. How can you possibly talk about these sorts of gender issues with a man who has no idea what your experiences are? And so like, how can that work, right? If that's the essence of the question, I think anyway, I would say maybe flip that 180 degrees and say, how can you as a female or a woman or whatever we're calling them nowadays, how can you, like, you can't empathize with what it's like to be a man. Now, I guess what I would say is that, like, obviously, if we want to like view this through like an oppression sort of lens, then obviously, men are traditionally the oppressors and women are the oppressed. Like, I get that. But at the same time, like, often men, like, they're reacting to their own experiences in their own day-to-day life when they remark in what might be perceived as like a controversial, or they might just have either it might even be like a tone deaf view, or it might be, a perspective which is, maybe doesn't ring true to you, or maybe sounds a little bit out of touch or whatever, but like they're just reflecting on their own experiences. So to give a concrete example of what I mean by that, like if a man says, I should be entitled to have a view on a topic like, let's say, a controversial topic like abortion, right? If a man says, look, this is not just purely a women's issue, this is like a question for humanity, and as part of humanity, like I do have a view and perspective on this, and I should be able to have that, then that's because that person feels like they're basically being told that you're not allowed to have even a thought about this because you're not a woman, right? Yeah. And that's where they're coming from, right? Yeah. And anyway, so I don't know if that really answers the question, but like that would be part of my response.
Yeah. Look, I think it's always hard with these listener questions because I really would love to get into this idea of two things. I always start off with like, what kind of feminist are you? What are your core beliefs, right? Like around equality and all this kind of stuff. And then, she's talking a little bit about a male-dominated workplace. So my mind instantly goes into how she's interacting against some of these conversations at a work setting, or a little bit of a work setting, right? Where she might need to come up with some of the challenges that we had in our episode, right? That I think that women may feel when they're in a male-dominated space, right, around being heard and not being treated with discrimination in kind of subtle ways, right? Look, I think that where my mind goes to is very much like, this is a gendered question, but you could definitely take the gender out of it, right? And I think actually by starting, the danger sometimes with being a male, whether it's a men's rights kind of guy or a feminist, is that you instantly see it through gender. And I think sometimes corporations work best when you don't even go there as the first point. You just treat, it's that kind of poker thing, right? You don't play the cards, you play the player. And I think that you can take that approach when it comes to this. If the listener is talking about challenges of getting their opinion, their kind of motivations, their agenda across at work, rather than just talking about abortion and other things like that, like these controversial ideas, I think that you don't always want to start with this idea of like men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of thing. You just want to kind of really try to treat people, go back to individuals and say, who am I talking to? What am I working with here, right? What are their motivations? Why are we having trouble communicating, whatever it is? And actually just like play the individual. And that would be my kind of guidance. Now, if we're talking about gender imbalance in terms of power, I think I heard this really good thing online actually, and it was talking about a father and a daughter wrestling in jiu-jitsu. And there's this idea that like there will be times where if you're facing a bigger opponent, and I'm not talking always about bigger physically in the sense of obviously expanded metaphor, there'll be times where you can't use brute strength to move them, and you have to find another way, right? You have to find another way to manipulate your position. And I think that that's true whether it's men or women, right? Like if you're dealing with a certain situation where brute force is not going to work, you're not going to be able to bully them into the outcome that you want. You're going to have to find another way. And I think if you start to think about it in that scenario, in a more kind of like power dynamics, you can reset your expectations. It's not about winning or changing the minds. It's about working with what you have in front of you. And I think that feminism and men's rights always puts us in opposition. It's like, I'm not really winning unless I'm changing your position on abortion. It's like, no, you might come up against someone where that's not even on the cards. Don't worry about that. Work at what you need out of this interaction and find another way around. And I think that's the kind of advice that I would give.
This does make me wonder, like we did an episode, just thinking back to we did with, was it Natalia back in, anyway, I can't remember how long ago it was.
That's the one I'm thinking of.
So we did that episode, and it was like a interesting exchange, but I think we felt like we just had some aspects of it that we didn't fully explore, and we decided, we'll just do a feminist episode ourselves. We just cut
It's always easier when you take the expert out.
Yeah, no, I'm just glad that this has come full circle, and we've now got feminists asking us about how not to compromise their feminist ideals. But yeah.
Work is work, right, Andy? Like, it's just like, does a corporation really have morals? Does it have positions and all this kind of stuff? Like, it's just work, right? It's about achieving an outcome, right? And all the rest is just social entertainment. So I think that, like, you need to kind of play it for what it is sometimes. Do you
I mean, I haven't really approached this by thinking about it in the work context, but like there's this kind of trope going about how the typical scenario is there's a meeting, and then a woman employee has in the meeting has a really good sort of expresses like her perspective in the meeting, and the cliche is that 2 minutes later everyone sort of listens to her and then kind of, all right, next, sort of thing. And the cliche is like then a man kind of says almost exactly the same thing, and then everyone goes, oh yeah, that's a really good point. And
yeah.
So, yeah, and like that's the setup, and that's kind of but I mean, I kind of feel that that's a little bit of a, like, one of those stories where if you actually boil it down, like most people have had some sort of experience like that, male or female, and like it's possible that it's like statistically more common for females, but like,
yeah,
it's not just this unique thing, but it's this story which, like, or it's this idea that resonates, that it gets this.
It's the dramatization of it all, Andy. Like, it's. I think if you truly looked at most of those interactions in a post-game analysis, you would find that the person who, in inverted commas, repeated your idea actually didn't. They built upon it, they added on it, they communicated it better, whatever it was. It's like saying, when the iPod came out, it's like, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be great if they like combined this with the phone? I could claim that I invented the iPhone, but I didn't. I thought about it, a vague concept of adding a phone into an iPod. I didn't do it, So I think it's like this idea of like, you always have this attachment. You always want to be validated in meetings, because meetings are meetings are like the ultimate human condition of like giving opinions but not doing any work. We all want to be like validated, and we all love it, but at the end of the day, it's like it's very meaningless, right? And I think that people get really caught up around the validations of their ideas in meetings, right?
I guess the other thing is, it's like if you have a sense, like you've been either brought up or constantly told that you come from the gender that never gets listened to, that gets ignored and isn't empowered in the workplace, isn't respected, and all of that, then every experience and interaction you have is seen through that lens. It's seen through the lens of disadvantage or disrespect.
Yeah. And
when it can be that that's not really the nature of the interaction, it can just be that, or maybe like if let's say a male employee has this exact same experience, they don't perceive it that way because they're not being told constantly about that aspect, or they can kind of just, oh, well, you win some, you lose some sort of thing, right? Like that might be how they place it.
Talking about full circle, Andy, like I think that so many of these issues, whether it's race, gender, all this kind of stuff, comes back to a kernel of what we've been uncovering and doubling down on the Indigenous, voice referendum and things like that, which is this idea of, do you strive to get to a place, whether it's race, gender, or whatever it is, where you want it to be unremarkable and deal with everyone as an individual on their own merits and their own personalities and characteristics? Or do you prescribe to a school of thought, a philosophy, a worldview that says, no, intersectionality is what it is, and you need to understand the base first, who this person is, or a Southeast Asian woman and all this kind of stuff, and what's their background, and then build it up from there, right? And I think they're two very different worldviews that collide. And I think when it comes to the workplace, I do think that the people that usually do best at this lean more to the kind of Martin Luther King style of the colorblindness and the genderless kind of view. Which is what my advice was to the listener too, right? Like this idea that don't start with the difference. Don't start trying to put them in the box. Just understand what's inside the box first, and then play your cards right. Yeah, and I think that's the problem. I think you make all these assumptions based on when you see, you're cis white male, or whatever it is, right? Like, and I think that, to your point, it traps you. It's like it's its own version of handcuffs, right? Because then you're always working backwards from that stereotype that you've constructed, right? And you've constructed it very fast based on a very loose set of information that you're going to have to undo now. Rather than trying to build up more knowledge over time, you're going to have to rewrite the essay that you've already kind of written in your mind. And I think that's the danger when it comes to people.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better myself.
That's because I repeated 80% of what you said. That's why you liked it.
I think the problem is like this suspicion, this deep suspicion like people have of, if someone's saying that, there must be some like suspicious or like ulterior motive, or there must be some pernicious something internally that's like motivating them to be evil, kind of thing. But it's just not true in most cases. Like, I think what is true is that I think often people say silly things, or things out of ignorance, or they say things out of like not being able to empathize with what it's like, so
yeah. And
that's very common, right? And but that happens like across the board, and that's a generic thing. It's not like a white people versus colored people versus male versus female versus, it's like, just literally, can you empathize like with the experience of that person? It's as strong for like someone who, like, let's say with if we talk about Jewish people at the moment who, like, let's say students who attend a Jewish school genuinely are fearful for their safety, such that they would not go to school like on the streets, like with their uniform. They would put like a hoodie over it or something, so they can't be identified in that way. Yeah. And we, who aren't in that situation can't kind of empathize with that. And that's the same phenomena as like someone who has kids and the challenges that they face like on a day-to-day basis, like the full gamut of those challenges, and someone who doesn't have kids not being able to even contemplate or even being able to even just sort of intuit like what the situation is for that person. Actually, we had a recent example of that.
I'm thinking about that right now. But yeah, I think that having kids is such a good example, because everyone, like so many people have kids, and it doesn't make you special because it's so commonplace. But at the same time, it's impossible to understand and empathize until you have your own. And I think that is the case. And like, let's just stop beating around the bush. We're talking about when we went out with our friend teacher Will, and that is the best example because he's a teacher. He spends his 9 to 5, or what is it, 9 to 3? Sorry, Will. His job is surrounded by kids. Yet he doesn't understand what it means to have kids, right? And you can't. I don't hold that against him. It's just that you can't do it until you have your own, right? And that sounds so annoying, I know, but it's true.
I'm just thinking if you need to elaborate for our listeners.
Okay, this is all love, so it's all good, right? So
he knows it too. He would if he's listening, he would know exactly what we're talking about.
So obviously, Tisha Will was in town, and we wanted to catch up with him as much as possible because we don't get to see him as much as we would like, being in another state. And so we organised to have a night out, go play tennis, get a bite to eat, and it was all booked in. We'd done the group chat to kind of organise everything, and I think about an hour out in the afternoon, we get a message in saying, I've had a busy day. I'm very tired. I think I'll just have a night in. Sorry, guys. And we're just sitting there going, oh, this is a classic thing of like, you're talking to two family men who have obviously negotiated with their spouses to have childcare, to get the night off, eke out some time, looking forward to this kind of this treat to go out with the boys kind of thing, and just flippantly kind of like turning that around. And also how triggering it is to say that you're like tired from being on holidays, that you need to have an early night as like a single man who can do whatever he wants on holidays when, we've got a litter of kids between us and all this kind of stuff. Like, and again, it's not like, at the end of the day, it's not Will's responsibility to feel any empathy. Like, he hasn't had kids. We have been the ones that have had kids and families, but it still burns and it's still an imbalance, right? Like, and yeah, so it's just kind of, and then obviously we had to negotiate from there. It's like, oh, come on, we really want to see you and all this and that. And he eventually caved and was like, yeah, all right, we'll come.
But see, I think that's also a really good example too, because the moment we raised, maybe not as black and white as we are now, but the moment like we kind of just said, hey, oh, what's the deal? I think he was very sort of, oh, yeah, okay. So like, I think with the full information about like, let's say that you'd made some plans and had to swing some things around or whatever, but nonetheless, like, I think knowing all of that, like it would have been like, oh, I can't possibly like, stuff these guys around. Like, oh, I just have to suck it up and go. But I think it was just the assumption. It was just and it's exactly what we're talking about. It was the inability to think that that's what we've done. I don't know what conversations you had. It might have been a lot easier than this, but like, just let's say like a fictional guest, coming to this event that we're talking about, they might have had to like, twist the arm of their partner to get out. They might have had to like, it might have been even an argument, right?
Yeah.
When you're negotiating with your partner to like have some time off, it can be an argument. It can be, you're always going out. Why are you going out all the time? Oh, this is not fair. It can get heated, right? And you have those sorts of things. So it's like, even if you, after that, such an argument, it can be you go through that experience. And then if you just then afterwards say, oh, I don't need to go after all, it's not as though like the argument never took place.
Yeah.
Like, like you've used some political capital to even just have the conversation in the first place, let alone the outcome, right?
Yeah, and like I said, it's all love. But again, that harks back to this idea of like, you might not be able to empathize and understand someone else's reality and what it took to achieve something, but the moment you do understand the inconvenience to them, that's more the case, right? It's about to understand how you act then, like the lady in the car park, right? In the face of inconvenience, all these like row of cars and people honking, I'm still going to stand here, right? Like I'm still gonna say fuck you. You
know what I'm sort of thinking about now is that, this is a question about from a feminist perspective and like how it's can't share the experiences. Here we are, a bunch of blokes talking about how we can't get a night off from our wives. As an example of our friend Will not being able to empathise with what it's like to be.
That's so true.
Like to be us.
We do have a growing female listener base. Actually, I've actually been pleasantly surprised that it has been growing. So we definitely do want to be challenged on all these things, and I think that it is important to kind of put yourself in that mindset as well. But I just don't think you need to always start there. And I think it's a disservice to do that, right? Like, and that's when you start to discriminate and make assumptions, which can be hilarious, but not often very functional.
Can I ask you, have you ever had a circumstance where with your partner, you have been, let's say, like if we think about feminism as like a spectrum of like more feminist or less feminist, right? Where on a given topic, you've been more feminist than your partner?
No. I really haven't. And I think I say that only because I believe that modern feminism, or popularized modern feminism, just takes that liberal left-wing extreme in most cases. And because of that, they've kind of, I'm never going to out-liberal like the really hardcore lefties, right? And so whatever social topic it is, I think that I'll either agree or I don't, but I'll never kind of outdo them when I'm talking about feminists. And I have to say, though, that like the reason I say that is because I believe for most women, and especially, you know, the ones that are very close to me, feminism is a hat that gets put on, right? Like there's a set of values that are aligned, but when it comes time to go into a debate, it's like stepping onto that sporting field. They put on the jersey and they put on the hat, and it's like, okay, well, look, yeah, no one else is going to do it. I'm going to have to play this side, right? You know, I can't do skins. I'm going to have to do shirts. So, you know, and you just take that role, and you end up like every good fight with your spouse or whatever. You end up saying things you don't truly believe because you both become, you both feel in more and more and more into the corners, right? And it's like you're just trying to get like them along the way. It's like, oh yeah, what do you mean by that? And then you like double down, and all of a sudden it's like you're in conflict again. And I think it's like that with male and female relations, right? I think it's kind of like you almost get there, and it's like, oh, but really, female comics aren't funny, and then it'll be you back in, you know, like whatever it is, and look. It's a tale as old as time, and I think the best thing to do is see it from a loving and slightly comedic lens, and you'll be fine.
I don't have a partner who's like, maybe we could call them like a superficial feminist or like a fashionable feminist, right? So like it's not this thing that like this card that she feels she's got to carry to like fit in or something, right? It's not like I need to be a good feminist because like almost like I need to be a good Christian, otherwise like my church friends might not respect me or something. So for that reason, like I don't think my wife sees the world through the lens as a feminist.
Okay, I do have one. And I think we tried to have a little bit of a conversation with Natalia about this, but it was vetoed for good reason. It's makeup, right? So depending on who you talk to in feminist circles, makeup is seen as an empowering thing. And also some people see it as an oppressive thing. And I see it more on the oppressive side. So that's probably one aspect where I actually am more feminist, I suppose, traditionally, if that is the right side of it. I don't know whether it is anymore, than a lot of women that are close to me. Because I feel like that is very much something that they are always blindsided by. So that they believe around this like objectification and all this kind of stuff, and the male dressing for the male gaze, and all this kind of stuff. And the reality is that makeup and the way it is used has very kind of patriarchal and sexual undertones. Overtones, undertones, middle tones, whatever. Like the reason that you are putting makeup on is to appear more sexually attractive and to leverage that power from a social setting. Right. So I'm a kind of believer in that it's kind of like an arms race. Beauty, makeup, plastic surgery is an arms race. And we would all do better as a society to put a little bit of guardrails on and just be like, everyone de-escalate, de-arm. Right. We're all going to be, we'll all find our place. Every pot has a lid, you know, maybe not the factory one that came with, but one the same diameter. And everyone just stop wearing makeup. The guys can do it. You can do it too. And, you know, your husband or your partner loves you when you wake up in the morning. They don't go, oh, look at this horrific sea monster. It's like, They find you attractive without your makeup on. It's just like another look. And I think that there'd be a lot of benefits to everyone just not wearing makeup.
So apart from any like sexual, I mean, I don't think if there's any sexual kind of aspect to it, I think even just forget that for a minute, even just the fact
if you think, really, Andy? Come on.
Well, okay, but like often that's something that could be debatable, right? You could find some feminists will say, no, we don't do it for men. Like that's a very, male thing to say kind of thing. But even if you just like, let's not get into that. Even if you just acknowledge that, like, Julia Gillard, when she was Prime Minister, had to spend like, I don't know how long, but like, let's say, half an hour having her makeup done before she did an interview, whereas Kevin Rudd or Tony Abbott, the two male prime ministers who, came before and after her, straight on camera, right? No, and you didn't have to spend that
They
time.
probably just wipe some factory sorbeline cream on their face.
Do you know? But but forget all of that. Do you know what? And because like I've had these sorts of discussions like before, because like I like getting into these sort of topics. And do you know what I've learned about it is that it's not necessarily that you're more feminist or not more feminist or whatever. It's just, and this is another one of these topics where women just don't like men talking to them about this. Like this is not.
It's not your space. It's not your car spot.
Yeah, and you can have like they might even like quietly agree with you, but exactly what you were saying before, they will put they'll play the role, and they will defend the opposite view to the one even if they actually agree with you quietly, because just they can't bear that you're talking to them and like lecturing them about wearing makeup.
And I get that. No one likes people telling them what to do, especially about things that they don't really have experience in, right? But we have experience consuming it, not having it put on our faces. But I think I used to have this director, and we got kind of close, and she used to always wear a lot of makeup, a little bit more. Like like there's makeup, and then there's like makeup. There's like getting your party face, your war paint on, and she always used to wear a lot, but she always used to complain about it, like it was a chore that she had to do, and like it's so hard being a woman because I've got to like spend all this time doing my lashes and stuff like that. And I just said cheekily one day, like, why did you do it? No one asked you to do it. And she just kind of like looked at me and was like, this little prick, right? Like this prick. And exactly what you meant, where it's like, it's true. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You're doing it because you like the way you look and you like the way people respond to you. And it gives you a leg up in certain aspects of your life, whether it's how you feel about yourself or how people respond to you. But you can't also complain about doing it as well, right? Like that's where I'm going to put my foot down. But again, it's like, this is not men's space. This is not a men's business. So just shut your mouth and tell me I look pretty. So I think this is the dance, right? This is the dance. And I think that by polite society, you obviously you don't offend people, and you just kind of go along your way. And that's why these discussions only come out with people you can trust and you love and whatever. Would you endorse that there? Just holding you on that view to try to drag you in the mud with me because we're here together. Would you also endorse like women just stopping makeup?
I think the challenge is that you can't be the first mover, right? Because if you're the first mover, you get punished in like a completely disproportionate way. So, and I think that's actually the problem. So if, let's say, all the women of the world came together and said, makeup's banned, no one's allowed to have it, it's all legal from the 1st of January 2024, no one's allowed to wear makeup.
Yeah.
And it was all coordinated, it could work. But all that's going to happen is like this director of yours is going to rock up to work one day without her face on, and immediately everyone's going to think, oh, geez, she's an alcoholic or something, right? and that's where the disadvantage comes from, right?
Yeah, I know. Well, maybe they should have like a public holiday where it's just like a no makeup day, and for that day, no one wears makeup, right? Like, and the gays would be included in this as well. They can't use their serums just for the day.
Well, on that note, have you ever worn makeup?
I have not, but
What about Botox?
no Botox. No. Is that on the menu now for men?
Oh, I'm sure there's a clinic in these sort of sole businesses, man.